I've been thinking about this summit for several days now, ever since it first kind of hit the airwaves, and the Russians were actually the first ones to confirm that there would be a summit. I think on the U.S. side, it took another day or so before the Trump administration agreed that there was going to be a summit. It was kind of conceptual, it was loose as to where it's going to occur. Let me first say, oh, I see, Oklahomans. That's nice. But my wife is from Oklahoma. Let me first say that this has got some serious kind of deja vu flashback vibes for me. My first day on the National Security Council in the White House was the Helsinki summit. I had been in Helsinki maybe 4 or 6 weeks before. It was a bilateral meeting between the Russian chief of of defense and the U.S. chairman, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That meeting, all the way back in 2018, went relatively well. I mean, that was obviously years into the Russia-Ukraine war, but the relationship hadn't completely collapsed, and we found reasons to communicate, mainly because we had to have conversations about our troops, U.S. troops in Syria and Russian troops in Syria, and we had to deconflict, making sure that there wasn't an accident, that there wasn't a something that triggered a direct confrontation between the U.S. And we had a series of conversations that on these topics. And the last one I participated in the Pentagon was in Helsinki. It turned out to be a good place. The Finns were great hosts, and we ended up coming back there for this. Part of the reason that the president met there was because we recommended that was a good venue for a meeting. Now, we all remember how that went. It was absolutely awful. It was the first it was the first substantive meeting between Putin and Trump. It was in a venue in which Trump was completely unprepared and easily manipulated, kind of almost like a plaything. Hearing Putin spin his grievances, complain about like all the wrongs that he's suffered, citing dates going back a couple of decades all the way to the beginning 2000s. So when I say deja vu, we're looking at something pretty similar. And we have a situation in which Trump has a largely incompetent team at the helm. When this was negotiated, it was on the promise of some sort of deliverable. It was with Steve Witkoff going to Russia and proposing some sort of deal that has been described at times as land swaps, in resulting in a ceasefire. It was a conversation about freezing the lines, um, so that the Russians no longer attempt to advance and the Ukrainians hold where they are. All this turned out to be a bunch of BS. Turns out that Stephen Woodcock, who seems to notoriously not take particularly good notes, not have um, embassy note takers with him. That's kind of a formal function for the embassy, to have note takers and advisors, folks that speak the language, participate. Got it mainly wrong. So when the Russians proposed this summit, they proposed it dangling the prospect of peace, which Trump wants desperately. And then when the Trump administration agreed to it, they yanked the rug right back out under the administration and said, nope, that's not what we agreed to. We had kind of a looser definition of what we were going to discuss, no ceasefire. So basically, Trump is wandering into the summit with in Alaska with Putin without any kind of agreed upon framework, something to kind of bound the discussion. You know, some working level agreements, some maybe cabinet level coordination, some discussion that says, we're working towards this aim. This is now turned into a sensing session, an effort to here, if there's a prospect for ceasefire and peace. So much looser. And I mean, playing this game of rope a dope that the Russians have been pretty effective in playing with the U.S. consistently, we have a situation in which they proposed Alaska, and that seemed like it was far enough away from Washington D.C. I mean, there's a bit of guesswork here, but they proposed Alaska. It seemed like it was, or soft pitched it, and the administration is like, "Fine, let's do it." Now, if we've been paying attention to the press, we know that uh, Trump has said that he's going to go visit Putin in Russia, and then referred to Alaska, which is like, music to the Russians' ears. It's gravy. It's the fact that they say that they only rented Alaska to us. It was a 99-year lease, and that lease is expired, and it's supposed to come back to Russian control, and it'll be pitched in Russia as like they're meeting on Russian territory, and they don't even have to make it a stretch. They could just play Trump's words. And then today, of course, I kind of made fun of Trump, talking about the fact that he referred to St. Petersburg, the second largest city in Russia, as Leningrad, and my joke was that if this was the Manchurian Candidate, Trump would be caught out as a Russian agent, or if this again wasn't Trump, it would be the towels that you would look for when somebody gives themselves away as a Russian agent. Mainly, this is almost certainly this is just incompetence and ignorance, but this is who Trump is, who Trump is, and this is who Putin is looking to manipulate. So again, Putin has been in power since 2000, actually, late 1999, and he's dealt with multiple different presidents. Clinton for a brief moment, but really four different presidents. And he can weave a narrative talking about different agreements that were made with previous presidents and how the U.S. kind of broke those agreements, and certainly all sorts of stuff kind of damning Biden and damning Obama, which would be music to Trump's ears, and all to kind of drag um, Trump into delivering Putin's lines. So puppeteering of Trump, and he doesn't really so, and there's nothing to bracket this. So I think that we should understand that this is likely, at the initial condition is kind of a disaster, and it's going to only, the potential outcomes are go from bad to worse. So not really anything in the way of deliverables, except for sensing out if there's a potential for peace, which there isn't. We should be clear that Putin has no interest in compromising. His foreign ministry announced that, there is no negotiation over the four territories that Russia has claimed to annex. So, this idea of trading territories is kind of a non-starter. The Ukrainians are in a position where they have to plan for the worst. They have to plan for a scenario in which the U.S. drops support, and they have to rely on their own means or on the Europeans to help support the war effort. It does not immediately spell disaster, but it definitely does complicate the Ukrainian war effort. If For those of you that have been paying attention, there are some troubling developments in on the Donetsk front, with the Russians achieving some penetrations, potentially amplifying to breakthroughs, and being able to maybe achieve some operational gains. It's still early days, and Ukraine has committed its most effective units to push back on this Russian offensive. Um, and the Ukrainians mainly faltered because their lines are too thin. They don't have enough manpower, and the Russians were effectively concentrating their forces. And over the course of weeks, were able to achieve some uh, notable gains. And this is just the summit is likely to put additional pressure on Ukraine. I think there's a reasonable chance where we end up with a situation where Trump puts pressure on Ukraine as intransigent, not Russia, not Russia that's unwilling to ceasefire to engage in a ceasefire or negotiations, but on Ukraine, and frankly, maybe even goes ahead and lifts sanctions. Those are all very, very plausible outcomes, and those are outcomes that are very, very divisive with our allies, strengthening Russia's hands, emboldening other adversaries that see there's a way to wheel and deal with this or effectively manipulate this president. The more benign situations are propaganda victories for Putin, a situation in which um, Trump's meeting offers legitimacy to the Putin regime. And at one point, I shared my view that the only reason that Putin should set foot on U.S. soil is so that he could be arrested and sent to The Hague for war crimes trials. So the fact that he's meeting with the U.S. president legitimizes him, bolsters his standing, opens the door for other regimes and states to expand their contact and normalize relations. That's the floor. That's the best case scenario. Um, so all in all, really quite troubling developments. I'm going to continue on with a little bit more comments, but I wanted to just tell you folks that when we switch to questions, I've got no real easy way to monitor this. So whoever's got the fastest finger, when as I see their questions, please ask your questions. I'll answer them, and then as I kind of wrap up, I'll try to do the best I can. There's no real effective way for me to kind of keep track of this, but I think in my comments, I'm trying to cover as much as possible. Um, so let's see. I think, frankly, we covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the battlefield and the complexities there. I'll just note that yes, it could be very, very. It could amplify the difficulties for Ukraine's war effort and national defense. But Ukraine at this point produces about 60% of its material, so it could continue to sustain itself. The Europeans can float certainly through financial support, the Ukrainian war effort. If the U.S. follows through on what it's already stated that it's willing to sell arms to Europe to provide to Ukraine, those are all things that could continue to keep Ukraine in the fight with no real significant prospects of Russian success. Um, but at the same time, the Ukrainians have some real significant challenges to work through. Maybe the most fundamental is, for those of you that have heard me talk about this, is the manpower issues are really, really problematic. The Ukrainians still are trying to restrict draft and conscription of folks below the age of 25. They want to preserve that generation as their future. But we're in a situation where Russia can gain and dictate terms and maybe drive an outcome that makes Ukraine, a rump state. And what kind of life is that? I mean, I guess it's survival, but I'm not sure if that's what Ukraine is willing to accept. So they need to really drastically address their manpower issues, their reorganization. Um, you know, there are still enduring challenges for Ukraine to deal with, even without the U.S. complicating matters. So I think with all that, I've got a couple pieces coming out. We'll see where they end up landing. I've got one coming out tomorrow that really talks about this bad to worse outcome, lays out a historical case because I wanted to make sure it's clear that it's you know the lessons of the past are clear. We've had summits with the Russians before in which we prepared exhaustively, and we were still outmaneuvered and manipulated. But this is not that administration. This is one in which Trump is easily manipulated, and it's really, really quite concerning and challenging. So I make a historical case, and I basically also make a point. I think that that's worth noting that Trump has been cornered into the meeting, having a summit. He can't back out of it to save face. So now, what is his next move? Is to declare a victory. So he's going to look for just about anything to grab onto in order to claim that he's won. Um, so again, why am I very anxious about this? Because I'm tired of seeing these train wrecks and mistakes repeated over and over, and we're about to see some significant ones for the history books coming out of the summit. Okay, so now is the time to drop your questions. We've got some time to have a conversation. I would like to, see what else is out there, and it could be Russia, Ukraine. It could be anything else going on. Of course, there are troops in streets in the U.S. Could it be possible that he leaves NATO? Is one of the questions, and I'll try to see if there's some more of these I could take a look at. So, it's interesting. I think that there is deep apprehension about his skepticism going back a long, long time about NATO. But thus far, the Europeans have been quite effective at engaging him and giving him those wins that he wants to be able to show to the American public. The declaration to spend 5% on of GDP on defense is we'll see what the Europeans do with regards to follow through, but that is a significant contribution to defense. And if they approach anything close to that, we're talking about €1 trillion in expenditures. And that's a huge amount of capacity for European defense to support Ukraine. Um, and ultimately, in the aftermath of Trump, as we continue to face these challenges of authoritarian regimes around the world, Russia's not going away under Putin's control. China under Xi's control. There's a real significant risk, I think, of Chinese aggression against Taiwan in the latter in the waning days of the Trump administration. I think that there, in the aftermath of these trials and tribulations, that $1 trillion in European expenditure is going to add to our ability to deter and for collective defense. So I think think about it this way: Trump has got his green fees, he's got his dues, and for now he's satisfied, and I think he's going to stay in. And I think the Europeans, I don't know if I completely agree with this approach. It's part of my concern about a values based approach, values primacy, this idea of neo idealism, and that we should say what we mean and adhere to our values. The Europeans are probably bending on those values and pandering to Trump, not necessarily meaning what they say, but it's enough to keep them on sides. And I think that's the course of action that they've chosen. So, less concerned about that, but definitely see cleavages and divides growing because the Europeans will it's in their own backyard. They're going to support Ukraine, and the U.S. is very well looking to back out and normalize relationships. Europeans just passed, I think there was their 18th sanctions package, and we on the other hand are going in a different direction, looking at potentially lifting sanctions. So not particularly helpful. So let's see. Let's see what else we have on here. There's a question about, who has influence in the Trump administration. It's interesting. Unfortunately, it's probably the worst actors that have the greatest influence. Certainly Stephen Miller has extremely wide latitude around the law enforcement um immigration issue, and that's why we're seeing kind of really amongst the worst case scenarios. I mean, we've started seeing the earliest telltale signs of, like, the concentration camps akin to what we did in World War II with Japanese internment. Alligator Alcatraz is an example of that on a kind of a small scale thus far. But I think that those are the drivers. Laura Loomer, just a complete right wing nut job, has had a lot of say on staffing, who stays and who goes. Criticizing somebody and declaring them anti-Trump will get them fired. She's done that with regards to going so far as to prevent the appointment of a West Point U.S. Military Academy um, professorship. So, there's also those are the kinds of characters that we're really talking about that are running the show. Or Russell Vought in OPM. with regards to these efforts to do rescission. This is the fact that Congress passed a law appropriating funds, and then they go back and look for a simple majority to take back those funds. That's it's got Russell Vaught's footprints or fingerprints all over that. Um, and this idea of violating empowerment, the way Congress directs funds being allocated, those are the folks that have you know. I think Marco Rubio is a survivor, dual-headed as the national security advisor and secretary of state. Has some influence, but it's probably limited. Pete Hegseth has some influence as a Fox News anchor, but it's this kind of fringe right-wing ecosystem. In spite of the fact that Trump's approval ratings are kind of plummeting. So unfortunately, and I find myself saying this over and over. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, the first current turn of the corner, I think, is maybe these November elections. If they're substantial, the victories are substantial enough, getting the Republicans, the political actors, to see self-preservation in their interest in pushing back on some of the worst instincts of the Trump administration. And I'm sorry, yeah, somebody pointed out Vance. I think Vance is also quite influential, although if you think about how Iran played out, Vance was on the losing end of that, didn't want to get involved, but Trump was convinced that this was a moment of weakness, that he could, curry favor with elements of his constituency, including evangelicals, and that he could get a win and look strong. And that was the basis on which to act. Tulsi Gabbard, not so much. I think she's trying to recover her standing by fabricating intelligence to talk about these BS kind of claims that the Russia collusion was a hoax when it wasn't, and things of that nature, just fabricating evidence left and right. There's some other external folks. I'd say Musk is less relevant. I'm not sure if Trump knows who Yarvin is, Curtis Yarvin. Um, Vance certainly does, but there are folks outside that have some influence also. So let me see what else we have in terms of questions out here. We have a few more minutes. Uh, yep, I think there's definitely that rift between Musk and Trump is kind of now set. There's probably egos are too big. There's not much in the way of reconciliation. Um, so I think that and we'll see when ends up happening with this third party. If Musk actually puts money into a third party, that will mainly peel away Republicans and kind of MAGAs and things of that nature, kind of undermining, you know, Republican electoral prospects. But it's right now it's more noise than substance. Let's see what else we got here. Um, I want to spend a minute talking about these troop deployments. We obviously first saw this in Los Angeles. We're now seeing it in DC with likely a lasting presence of troops that's going to expand. I think in certain regards, it's hard, but these troops should not be considered the enemy. They're executing lawful orders. The president has constitutional authorities. These are what fall into the lawful but awful category, and they're not there to crack skulls or suppress the population. They're going to they're being prepared to implement kind of use of force, escalation, and things of that nature to try to avoid confrontations with the population. I'm frankly much more concerned about this explosion in the ICE budget and the fact that they're going to bring in insurrectionists, militias, um, bounty hunters to be able to do this lift, and they might be able to do it in a strategic manner. For instance, they've got more than a year to prep for the midterm elections and deploy these troops to suppress the population. That is something that kind of really bothers me, and it's going to be challenged in the courts. But It's really going to take people power, folks getting out and making their voices heard. I'd like to see some people power here where you got 1,300 folks, contact, and I think we're representing lots of different corners of the country. I would ask you to contact your congressman and senator, Republican and Democrat, and tell them that you are concerned about this meeting between Trump and Putin. That you feel like that the Trump has been kind of roped into this meeting, and that that there's a concern that he will jeopardize U.S. national security. There is actually a congressional role here. There are sanctions that Congress have enacted that are being levied on Russia, and um, the president can't just lift those sanctions. He has to notify Congress, submit waivers that Russia, is meeting, certain criteria. So the bottom line is that the Senate could be, nope, we're not lifting sanctions. So letting those folks know is quite important. Um, okay, let's see. Yeah, well, a good question about where Congress is. They're in recess. Certainly, the House is in recess because of the Epstein files and the unwillingness to, kind of have that public debate. So those damn Epstein files must be pretty horrific in implicating in Trump and his notorious womanizing and you know, uh, his adjudicated sexual assaults. So I think it sounds like it's pretty damning, and he's doing a lot of things to distract from this and try to see if he could change the narrative. And so far, it's not at the. It's bubbling just underneath probably the top of the headlines because, in a large part, MAGA won't let it go. Um, okay, gerrymandering. This is an interesting one. I'm glad somebody raised it. So of course, Trump called on reading the tea leaves, Trump called on Texas to gerrymander and find five new Republican congressional seats. And the Texas legislature is looking to undertake that effort. And in order to prevent that, Democratic legislators left to prevent a quorum to vote this in. So this is the whole idea of like then kicking those guys out or arresting him. That's going to play out locally. It's also going to play out nationally because New York and California, if they chose to pursue that same route, the number of seats they have, it could really make it impossible for the Republicans to win any more seats um, in those states and put Congress out of reach. Those are massive states with lots of seats. And I think this is likely to be figured out in the courts. But it's kind of funny if you watch Gavin Newsom talk about this issue. Quite hilarious, using Trump's own language the way he talks about it, trolling him, in a singular manner. I think that he's willing to undertake the same approach if the Republicans pursue this course of action. Um, there's a lot more to say about this. I've got, like I said, a article coming out tomorrow, something else on Friday, um, some other things in the works. I had an idea of commenting on artificial intelligence and the impact, but there are so many urgent things that are immediately in front of us. And you'll also, tune into MSNBC, CNN, NBC, BBC. I've got a ton on NPR tomorrow morning in the 7 hour. You'll be seeing me, I think, all over for the next several days, as this is the most kind of relevant, one of the most relevant news issues out there. So again, thank you very much for participating. Some over 1,400 of us. I really appreciate you all coming in and helping me spread the word about these dangers, and looking forward to catching you in the near future. Thanks.